Turn into your Bibles. We have some Bibles in the front of your pews if you left yours at home. To today's scripture lessons, the first comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 34, verses 29 through 35. And as I read this, listen for the word of the Lord speaking to you. Moses came down from Mount Sinai as he came down from the mountain with the two tablets of the covenant in his hand. Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, the skin of his face was shining, they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses spoke with them. Afterward, the Israelites came near, and he gave them the commandment that the Lord had spoken with him on Mount Sinai. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would take the veil off until he came out. And when he came out, he told the Israelites that what he had been commanded. The Israelites would see the face of Moses, that the skin of his face was shining, and Moses would put the veil on his face again until he went in to speak with him. And our second scripture actually comes from the Gospel of Luke chapter 9, verses 28 through 36. Again, listen for God speaking to you. Now, about 8 days after these things, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James, and they went up to the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. And suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking with them. And they appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with them. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, is it good for us to be here? Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one of any of the things they had seen. Family, this is the word of the Lord. I am very blessed to have a group of very close friends that I met when I was in college. And these are a group of guys who all served as my roommates for 3 years. And I think the reason that we are so close is because we shared so many important moments of our lives together. We laughed together, we cried together, we struggled with our studies together, we figured out what we were doing with our lives, and we did it all together. But we were also there for other big moments. Moments like our continual effort to try to find someone to date and hopefully someone to marry. And on that note, we had this moment that all of us experienced, and we always made sure to make fun of each other for this. And that is when we would walk into the room exhibiting what we would call the goofy grin. Now, the goofy grin is the look that we would get when we encountered a lady that we had affections for, and we conveyed our feelings to that lady, and then that lady reciprocated those feelings back to us. It didn't happen that often, but whenever it did, we would come back, and we would have this goofy grin on our face, and it's like we all knew what had happened, and so we would always stop whatever we were doing because we had to hear what happened, and we still laugh about that to this day. Actually, all of us ended up marrying someone from college. But we laughed at that moment because it was as if there was this magic that was present as we put ourselves out there and told these girls how we felt, and then to hear them reciprocate that in one way or another. And the magic of that moment seemed to linger and rest on us as we hop, skipped, and jumped back to our room so that we could tell people. It was a moment that lasted longer than the event itself. Quite magical. But today we're talking about what happens when we come into the contact with something extraordinary, someone extraordinary. And it's much more extraordinary than anyone who we might have romantic feelings with. Because in fact, we are talking about what happens when we come into the presence of the living God. And I hope that what you saw here is we have two instances in Scripture where people came into contact with the living God. And when it happened, amazing things happened. But we see two different responses. The first is that of terror, and the second was that of transformation. When we pick up with Moses, he had actually is returning with the second set of the 10 Commandments that he was bringing to the people, because we all know what happened the first time, right? Moses comes down with the 10 Commandments, and he sees the people of Israel have constructed this golden calf, and they're worshiping this calf as Moses is coming down, delivering the word of the Lord. And Moses was so angry that he threw the tablets at the calf and he broke them. So we had to go back up and ask God for another set. So he's returning again from the presence of the Lord. And if we see in this story as he goes and he's in the presence of the Lord, he wanted to be in that pure presence. And he's like, show me your face, Lord, show me your face. And God said, look, if I show you my face, it will kill you. My presence is too holy for you. But what you can do is you can see my backside or where I just been. And so it's this indirect presence that Moses is returning to his people, and his face is glowing. This is a tidbit. If you look at some art from the medieval times, there was a mistranslation, and instead of having his face glow, it used to say his face had horns. So you might see Moses with some horns on him in some paintings. But what we now know is that what the Scripture was telling us is that Moses' face was glowing as he returned from God's presence, and that terrified the people. We had to put a veil over his face as not to scare his brothers and sisters. And in this encounter, we learned two things. The first is that the presence of the Lord is real and it is tangible. Moses did not return from the mountain experiencing a set of moral codes. Moses did not return from the mountain after experiencing some really good teachings. No, Moses returned from being in the presence of the Lord. A very real and tangible thing. So much so that that presence lingered on his face. So the first thing we learn is that God's presence is real, it's tangible. It's something that we can experience in a real and tangible way. And the second thing we learn is that God's presence can be very terrifying to people who are not prepared. The people, once they saw Moses and they saw this evidence that he was in the presence of the Lord, it terrified them. And they said, go cover your face. We cannot handle this right now. God's people were not ready. Maybe it's because they had just finished building this calf to worship. And maybe seeing the presence of the Lord brought them face to face and made them confront their own failures and their own darkness. But whatever it was, the people were not ready. That's what makes this story in the New Testament all that much more magical and amazing. As Jesus and Peter and John and James, they make their way up to the mountain. And all of a sudden, Jesus changes. And he starts to emanate this life from him. He was transformed. And then Moses and Elijah were sitting next to Jesus, the most powerful prophets. And what we see here is someone who is coming into direct contact, having direct presence with the Lord. But it was not Jesus coming into the presence of the Lord, because Jesus was the presence of the Lord here on earth. And it was Peter, and James, and John who were there experiencing this. And it was Elijah and Moses from the glory of the Lord that were experiencing the presence of the Lord. But it was more direct, it was personal, it was real. It wasn't the backside, it wasn't just where God had been. God had made it possible so that the real, unfiltered presence of the Lord could walk on this earth. And that is what they experienced that day on the mountain. And it was enough to transform them. Christ isn't just a good teacher. He didn't just have a good set of morals. Christ is the presence of the Lord given to us. He is more than a prophet. He is more than a teacher. He is God on earth. And what we see then, as the disciples experience this, and they realize that they are in the presence of the Lord, they spend the rest of their lives sharing that. They had been touched by this light of Jesus in a way that they felt compelled to go and share it, and all of them spent the rest of their lives sharing Christ's light. And that is the opportunity that all of us have here today. We have a light that can shine. Not because of anything that we have done, but because of God's willingness to let us experience the presence of God. To let us experience Christ in a real and tangible way, in a way that can give us guidance in healing. The Transfiguration is such a mysterious part of Scripture. And I don't think we'll know exactly everything that happened to Jesus on the mountain that day until the day that he comes again to explain everything in his glory. But I can tell you one thing. God's light is enough to sustain us until that day comes. Whenever I tell people why I became a pastor or my story, I often give the Spark Notes edition, which is I was in college, I felt God calling me to ministry, so I started studying Scripture. I got a bachelor's degree in theology, then I went to seminary and became a pastor. But what I don't tell sometimes is the real moment, and there is a moment for me that I knew that God was calling me to full-time ministry. And it was when I was 19 years old and I had a vision. Very un-Presbyterian. Not Presbyterian at all, but I had a vision. So don't go and tell the people at the Presbyterian. But I was praying. I was on my knees and I was praying to God to show me what I needed to do with my life. And immediately I found myself in the presence of the Lord and I saw God. And he gave me a hug and he told me that he loved me. And having this opportunity, I said, God, what am I supposed to do with my life? And he took this ball of light. And he said, man, this is my light for the world. And he took his hand and he pulled out a strand of light. I remember this like it was yesterday. And he put that light in me. And he said, it is now your job to go and spread that light. And that is something that has been the fuel to my fire. It has been something that has kept me going. It got me through college. It got me through seminary. It got me through my ordination process. It's the fuel that keeps me going every single day. I love you guys so much. I love serving you. I love sharing Christ's life with you. I love what God has called me to do, even amidst the challenges. Even in times when I doubt myself, even in times when others doubt me, I go back to that moment and I remind myself that it is not my accomplishments, it's not my wits or my smarts, because that doesn't get me very far. It is the light of God that He has given me, and it is the light of God that He has called me to share with others. And that is just my own personal story. That's how God's light has impacted me. Now I ask you, how has God's light impacted you? Are we walking around with that goofy grin? There are so many ways to do it. God doesn't call all of us to be a pastor like me. God calls each and every one of us in our own world, in our own lives, to share His light with others. We got to receive that light first. We got to let that light shine in our own darkness. And that light can bring us healing. It can bring us hope. It can bring us transformation. But we can share that light with others. And so that's my prayer for us. My prayer for us is that we can be individuals as well as a community that can continue to let Christ's light shine in us so that we can then go and shine that light onto others. And may Christ's light sustain us until the day that He comes again. Amen.